the latest PhUSE Working Groups webinar, our kind of little March to March 2016 series. So as many of you may know, that the registration is now open for the 2016 Computational Science Symposium. And as many of you may also know that the PhUSE Working Groups are an all-volunteer organization. And unfortunately, a few of the presenters that we had anticipated having for you this morning are unable to present due to the demands of their day job. So with that being said, I still think we have an excellent agenda for you today. Chris Decker is going to be providing us with an overview of the 2016 CSS, as well as some information about how you can register for the event. Unfortunately, DJ is not able to present on the best practices for managing changes to standards, so I will do my best to fill in for him. And similarly, and also unfortunately, our FBA presenter had some demands with their day job as well. But I think we are bringing you a new and exciting replacement presentation on a new project that may actually end up replacing SAS version 5 transport as the transport format. So we're going to talk a little bit to that new project. And then if we have time at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about another new project around use cases for linked data in the clinical trial lifecycle. So before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. We will do Q&A at the end, time permitting. So if you have questions, please enter those into the question functionality in your GoToWebinar session. If we are unable to get to your questions, we will answer those offline and post those on the PhUSE website. As you may have heard, the presentation is being recorded, so if you have to drop off early, or you have other colleagues that may be interested in any of the topics, especially the transport format topic, please, the recording will be posted, so you can forward that around. And then finally, PhUSE does have a social media presence with Twitter and LinkedIn. So these new projects, in addition to this webinar, will also be announced in the coming weeks on the PhUSE social media websites, again, both on Twitter and LinkedIn. And as we go along, kind of marching to March, you'll also see updates on social media with regards to the 2016 CSS. So without any further ado, I am going to turn it over to a man who needs no introduction, Mr. Chris Decker.
Thank you, Scott. I'll share my screen momentarily. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you all for attending today. And as Scott alluded to, collaboration is all about flexibility as well. I'm going to go through a few introductory slides here. I know for some folks that have attended these in the past, these are probably very repetitive, and my apologies for those individuals. But we always have new people who are joining and wanting to learn about the collaboration. So I'll spend a few minutes going through an overview of the collaboration. Then, as Scott alluded to, I want to begin to give a sneak peek of the conference in March and provide a little bit of information on that event. In the coming months, we'll be providing a lot more information about specific projects and activities at the CSS in March. But I wanted to spend today just to give an introduction. So to give an overview of, again, I think most everyone knows PhUSE, organization that really tries to provide a platform across industry for creating and sharing ideas and implementing tools and standards around data and technologies and process. We're in our 12th year of existence and our 5 years with this specific collaboration. So the paradigm shift of this collaboration, and 5 years ago when we initiated this, we called it sort of Meeting 2.0, but it was a way to get together people from various organizations, regulatory, vendors, sponsors, CROs, around a table discussing the issues, challenges, and potential innovative new technologies that we could leverage and use to improve the product development process. In the past, I think there was a tendency to go to conferences and have people stand up in front, whether it be the FDA, the EMA, and give a presentation, and then sort of ask a question or two at the end and not really collaborate. And that was the goal of this initiative years ago. So the mission, I don't want to dwell on all the words here, read them, but it's really about transparency in a non-competitive environment across academia, regulatories, technology, and industry. So what is the computational science collaboration? Well, it's made up of two components. The working groups themselves that work and together as volunteers throughout the year, and then the symposium, which happens every March, where the working groups come together, share what they've accomplished in the last year, and work towards other activities. Scott, I just want to make sure you can still hear me. Is that correct? I had a blip on my side.
Yep, you are fine.
Okay, my apologies for the break. I just had a beep on my side and wanted to make sure. So the collaboration is made up right now of 5 working groups, and these working groups have morphed over the last 5 years, and we've settled on these for about the last 3 years, and I'll talk through each one of these. There's a steering committee that sits in the middle that is made up of a set of individuals from the FDA, industry, and then liaisons with each of these working groups so that we can share information, align on activities, and communicate both internally among the groups as well as to external organizations. Among these projects, we realized, just a month ago or so, that we have over 30 active projects that are either ongoing and active throughout these working groups. That's a lot of projects that have sort of evolved and grown over the course of the last 5 years. And you can go to I'll show you later, there's a link to our dashboard where you can actually go through and look at these projects and get involved in any or all of them. So to quickly go through the different working groups, we have the non-clinical working group, very, very strong and group that's really worked on improving the non-clinical assessment and regulatory science through a number of different avenues around SEND, through CDISC, and other activities. The optimizing use of data standards is the one that's closely tied to CDISC, and we meet with CDISC on a regular basis to talk about the activities we have going on within that group. It's really focused on looking at the gaps and potential best practices that we could define around implementing the standards. CDISC focuses is developing the standards, and we're looking at how to best implement them and close those gaps. For example, the development of the Study Data Reviewers Guide a few years ago, which is now referenced and used within the guidance. The Semantic Technology group, this was a group that was born about 2 years ago out of the Emerging Technologies group, which I'll talk about in a moment. But it's really how do we leverage forward-thinking technologies or technologies that are used in other industries in a more robust way around semantics. And there's a lot of activities going on in that arena. There's a standard scripts working group that is looking at establishing a platform for collaborative development of program code, all kinds of different program code, to be used for standard reporting and analyses. That also contains, their repository contains a number of FDA scripts that have been shared with us through the FDA, so you can go look at what the FDA scripts are running. Finally, the Emerging Technologies Working Group. This is one, again, that was initiated about 3 years ago with the goal of being an incubator to the other groups. So are there new ideas out there that people have about areas that need to be tackled? This past year, they looked at things like data visualization and text mining and statistical computing environments. So there's new things that are incubated. They're usually at the annual conference in March that people get together, they talk about these different ideas and determine what could be moved forward in terms of a real project. So I want to talk a little bit about the event in March. So we'll have the Computational Science Center this coming March, the 13th to the 15th in Silver Spring, Maryland. Hopefully this year we've had a wide range of weather patterns in our events over the years, from 70 degrees and sunny to a blizzard that we had to address a few years ago. So we'll see. This is always an interesting time of the year for that. We're working on a co-sponsorship right now with the FDA. So this will be hopefully a formally co-sponsored event. Some of the upcoming dates, as Scott mentioned, registration for this opened this past Monday. So this is open. The call for posters ends on January the 15th, and the early bird registration on January the 29th. I would strongly suggest people register early. We only have room in this venue, and for those that have been there, you know that we only have room for 300 attendees to this event, and it fills up pretty quickly. In fact, since Monday, we've already gotten a number of registrants, and so I would suggest not waiting until the January-February timeframe. I would also suggest, back to the call for posters, that you submit your ideas. It's been, in past years, I've found the poster sessions to be very innovative. We have a number of FDA posters. Usually half of our 25 to 30 posters are from the FDA, as well as industry, and it's really a good session that we have on the Monday evening. Sunday night, we'll have an opening session. So this is a little different than in past years where we've had some informal networking. We will actually start the CSS 2016 on Sunday evening from 5 to 7. We'll have an opening session, a welcome, and a working group overview, and then we'll actually follow that with some working group breakout sessions just as an introductory to the working group. So this is, and I'll be tweeting this and putting it on LinkedIn as well. This will be formally starting on Sunday evening. So as you make your plans and your reservations, plan to arrive mid-afternoon on Sunday if possible, so we can get started on the evening and get moving. A couple of new or redone activities or reorganized activities. We will have a collaborative scripting session. In the past, we've called this a scriptathon. That group is getting together and thinking about different ways to do that session and make it more interactive and talk about best ways to move that forward. So that's going to be a sort of a reworked session that we'll have. The other one we're going to introduce this year, which came out of an idea from the PhUSE annual conference a month ago, was to have a Semantics 101 workshop. So for those that have seen some of this or been engaged, the idea of semantics and some of the technology behind it, the modeling, you hear things like RDF and triples and other words like this, can be quite daunting when you're trying to understand it and how it relates to clinical data. So we're going to run a workshop at the event, still working on which day, but we're going to run a session that really lays this out in a very simplistic way and provides people a basic introduction and relates it to clinical data. So we hope this will be a well-attended event and give people that first introduction to this area of technology that we believe can really change some of the way we collect and move information around. Stay tuned for that, more information on that. So when you sign up for the conference, we'll be sending out, when we finalize the schedule for these activities, we'll be sending that information out and asking for those people interested to sign up. A little bit about exhibitors and sponsors, just for those that might be on the phone from organizations who are interested in sponsoring. Our exhibitor space, just like that, is sold out. So there are no more spots. If you want to call and get on a waiting list, there might be an opportunity. Sponsor opportunities, we have lots of those. A number have been sold out already, but we have opportunities for lunch sponsorships, break sponsorships, Sunday evening events. So if you want to contribute and sponsor this event so that we can make it as good as we can, let the PhUSE office know. The agenda, we put a preliminary agenda together, which is out there on after the Sunday evening, where we'll do the welcome and the opening. On Monday, we'll have our usual FDA State of the Union, where the FDA will get up and provide first an overview of the collaboration from their perspective and how they get involved and what they do within their organization to support the various working groups and projects. We'll have a presentation on the e-study guidance document, which I know is important and critical for everybody. How much do you know and what do we need to prepare? Data integrity overview, some feedback on what CDER is seeing with their submissions in SGTM, ADAM, and SEN. And then an overview of the reviewer's guide. So this is something that's ongoing at the FDA. What is the state of affairs of the study data reviewer's guide and the ADAM, and a new one which is out for public comment, the non-clinical study data reviewer's guide. So that'll be a good and informative session that we have on that Monday morning. We'll then break out into our working groups as we normally do on Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning. So the groups will get together. Each group has sort of their own dynamic in terms of how they want to share information. So there'll be some of that sharing what they've done in the last year, working on projects, breaking out in even smaller groups. So there'll be a lot of those activities that go on through Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning. On Monday evening, as I mentioned before, we'll have the poster session. And we'll have networking and snacks and drinks. As I mentioned earlier, that we also have two other events, a version of the Scriptathon, and as well as the Semantics 101 workshop. So we'll let people know as that happens. Sunday evening or Monday evening is when those activities will happen. And then the conference closes on Tuesday at 4 p.m. So we will have another roundtable discussion with the FDA on that Tuesday afternoon, and then all head on home after the event. Just give a little bit of information about where you can go get information. It's on the PhUSE website is where we have information about our the event in Silver Spring. One of the areas, just as a teaser, that we're exploring and talking with organizers for the European annual event is looking at some sort of MIDI version of the Computational Science Symposium in Europe. So we're still talking and discussing how we might be able to do that. Overview of the active projects. So this is sort of a dashboard of what projects. Again, that's off of the PhUSE.eu website. And a catalog of what our deliverables are to date, and then those are actually under review. So those are all off the PhUSE website versus our ongoing wiki. And then more information about the actual projects and what the working groups are doing are found on the PhUSE wiki under the working groups. At any point, you can go to this link here, and you'll see it off the main page of how you can get involved, and you can email any of the working group leads and ask them how you can get engaged in some of these projects. If you have an idea for a new project and there's something in your company or you've heard in other industries that you think might apply, submit a new project request, and the steering committee will review that and can move it forward. And then we always need help in our technical team as we look at the best tools to collaborate, whether they be the wiki or distribution lists or other collaboration tools for sharing information. We always need those hobbyists that love technology and want to help out with our various activities. And that's really all I have, Scott. A quick introduction, and then we'll be providing more information about the Computational Science Symposium in March in upcoming webinars.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Chris. You want to turn the presenter rights back over to me? I'll continue moving forward. Okay. So are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. So as Chris mentioned, there are approximately 30 projects that are ongoing across the 5 different working groups that comprise the collaboration. And what I'm going to present over the next half an hour, excuse me, is our 3 new projects that we'll be launching. Again, I probably won't be able to do DJ's project justice, but I will do my best. So this best practices for managing standards versioning project will be taking place in the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards working group. And that working group itself is really put together to explore challenges and opportunities for sponsors or regulatory agencies working with the CDISC standards to really maximize the benefit and maximize the use of those standards. So, as we all know, the standards are well formed, but there are some, minor gaps and minor issues. And again, this working group really looks to kind of close those gaps and address some of those issues. So this new project that we're talking about regarding, how to best practices for managing and working with standards versions came out of a roundtable at the 2015 CSS. So the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards working group had about 5 or 6 tables set up over lunch, and people gathered and talked about specific topics like some best practices around the FDA guidance that was released in December 2014, so it was still fresh. Earlier in 2015, there was some talk about best practices for documenting metadata in a submission. So whether you use the reviewer's guide that Chris mentioned earlier, or whether some of the metadata should actually be documented and defined in XML. And this project, with regards to managing or how to best practices around managing standards versions, was something that also came up with regards to topics at these roundtables. And I think as most of us that kind of work with standards on a day-to-day basis know there are some challenges about knowing, how do I move from version A to version B? How do I version control terminology? How do I address something that previously was sponsor defined and now it's been published by CDISC? So this project will really kind of look into some of those areas. So again, like I said, I think for those of us that kind of work with standards on a day-to-day basis, whether it's as a standards manager or a standards consumer, whether we're at the regulatory agency reviewing submissions provided in standards format, we all are aware of those challenges around versioning. And again, I think pulling the different groups together from different sponsor companies, from different regulatory agencies, getting around the table and trying to come up with some ideas about how, whether you're on the sponsor side or the regulatory side, how we can all, manage our versions or work with versions in a little bit more effectively. I think that's a positive step forward. Again, the goal of this project is really to identify those issues that impact everybody along the data chain and come up with, some best practices around those. And then once this working group is kind of formulated those best practices, they will actually put a white paper out for review, and they're really hoping to kind of get that white paper formulated around December of 2015. So I think it looks like the kickoff, again, I apologize that I'm not doing DJ justice here. The kickoff for this meeting should occur sometime in November, and then the group will try to hone in on a few issues and then publish a white paper around those issues. And once they publish that white paper, it will be put out for public comment. So if you have input on the best practices that this group is addressing and think there are other challenges you think should be addressed, when things go out for public review, that's a perfect opportunity for you who may not be involved in the project to provide your feedback and get some of your ideas incorporated into the project or incorporated into the white paper. So after the public review, the team will then take those comments that they receive and refine and revise the white paper, and it looks like they're hoping to do that refining at the March 2016 meeting. So if you are attending the 2016 CSS and managing standards versioning is a topic that's of interest to you, if you don't have time now to get involved in the project, you can actually step in if you are attending a 2016 conference. And as Chris mentioned, the registration space is limited. So you could step in at 2016 conference and get involved in this project and help them refine and revise that white paper. And it looks like as they go along, sorry about that. As they go along with the project, it looks like they will actually be doing some additional refinements and addressing some additional ambiguities throughout the course of 2016. So after the meeting in March of 2016, just continuing to work on other best practices around versioning. So in terms of expectations with regards to participation, just bring your subject matter expertise, bring challenges that you're facing in your organization, whether you're a sponsor company, whether you're on the regulatory side, whether you're a technology provider and are seeing challenges implementing standards or developing solutions around standards implementation. Bring those all to the table, because that, I think, will allow this project to really hone in on a few challenges or a few opportunities that are unique across all of the different participants in this project, and then really, again, develop the white paper to address those top one or two critical areas with regards to standards versioning. So again, this is kind of some of the logistics for the project. Most of the work will be done via teleconference. I think we are still looking for a project lead or a project co-lead to help coordinate the project. I think DJ has identified one person as a co-lead, and it always helps to have multiple people assisting with the project leadership as well as the project management around it, which again kind of gets to some of the note-taking and updating of the wiki page, because the wiki is our sort of public-facing site for people that want information about the project, want to keep kind of current with the project. So we do need some project management assistance with that. Again, as I mentioned, project lead, the volunteers that, again, if you have issues or challenges in your company or whether you are, again, a sponsor or a technology provider in the regulatory space, you know, we know there are challenges out there. If you bring them to the project and to the forum, it actually allows us to address those issues so that, you know, we can do things in a more cohesive manner, and it's not, you know, we're not working in our silos as we too often do. If you are interested in getting involved, this is DJ's contact information, as well as the working group contact information itself. Excuse me. So if you're interested in getting involved, you can contact DJ directly. You can email the working groups, and it will help to connect you to that project. Okay. So again, if you have questions about as we go along, please feel free to enter that into the GoToWebinar question functionality, and we'll address those at the end of the session. So I'm going to move on and talk about two other new projects that we'll be kicking off shortly. One from the Emerging Trends and Technologies Working Group, and another from the Semantic Technologies Working Group. So first, the Emerging Trends and Tech Working Group. So there's a new project that's going to be launching either later this month or next month in December to evaluate and prototype alternative transport formats for submission to support structure and content requirements. So that's a really big mouthful. So it sounds like, again, evaluating essentially a replacement for the SAS version 5 transport format. So as you hear me say that, people's jaws are probably dropping. There's probably gasping on the phone that I'm not hearing. So I need the disclaimer. The presence of this project does not imply that regulatory agencies will be adopting a new transport format. Furthermore, it does not imply that sponsors will need to submit data in a new format. So what I'm saying, if I rephrase it in another manner, that the presence of this project does not mean the FDA is replacing SAS version 5 transport. The purpose of this project is really just to evaluate other transport formats and see if there is something that may be a little bit better out there. So just kind of thinking about that as kind of the disclaimer, sort of the backdrop. So I'm going to give people like a couple seconds just to ponder over the date October 21st, 2015. So hopefully you'll realize that October 21st of 2015 was Back to the Future Day. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Back to the Future, it was a movie, I think the first film was released in 1985, and kind of the penultimate time travel movie. So Marty McFly is played by Michael J. Fox, and Dr. Emmett Brown is played by Christopher Lloyd, go backwards and forwards in time. And October 21st, 2015 was the last future date that was referenced in the Back to the Future trilogy. So why is that important? Why are we in the pharma and regulatory space still stuck in 1985? We're using a SAS version 5 transport, which actually predates Marty McFly. And I did a little fact checking, and I believe SAS version 5 transport was before 1985. And if there are nerds like me on the phone that think I would say it was after 1985, at least it was in the 1980s. So I'm in the ballpark. So why else are we stuck in 1985? Two-dimensional data structures, the rows and columns that we work with every day, I think those predate everyone, or at least most people on the line. So how can we actually move our industry forward? So some other kind of background information for how this project came to be. So in November of 2012, the FDA held a public meeting on study data exchange standards, again acknowledging that SAS version 5 transport was the current data exchange standard at the time, and looking for possibly different opportunities for different transport formats. So from April 2014 to November of 2014, the FDA conducted a pilot to evaluate CDISC dataset XML as an alternative transport format. And in April of 2015, the FDA published the results of the DS XML pilot, and you can find those results on the FDA's Data Standards Resources website. The report is there in PDF format. And just as a quick summary, the FDA's findings as a result of that pilot were that dataset XML addressed some of the basic technical challenges that we currently have with SAS version 5 transport, i.e. variables are limited to 8 characters, variable labels are 40 characters, character strings need to be 200, and other technical challenges that are inherent with SAS version 5. However, the FDA also noted that even with dataset XML, that the dataset size itself remained a challenge. So in summer of 2015, the FDA reached out to the PhUSE working groups to discuss the potential of creating a public forum for evaluating alternative transport formats. So as part of those discussions, that's really where this project came to be. So there was a project proposal that was put together in October of 2015. The PhUSE steering committee that Chris talked about earlier that kind of oversees the working groups actually approved that project in the project that I'm talking here about to actually evaluate and prototype alternative transport formats. So as part of that approval process, the steering committee liaised with the FDA and liaised with CSS to gather their input to ensure that all organizations were really aligned on this project and saw the value in it and moving it forward. So again, I'm just kind of here today to kind of give you a little bit of a kickoff to this project and some more additional information. So if you are interested in getting involved or you have colleagues that may be interested in this topic, to kind of spread the word and kind of get people motivated to participate. So this project is being separated into two phases. So phase one is really to evaluate I shouldn't say all of the possible transport formats, but to evaluate different transport formats that support like the structure and content requirements. So as part of that initial phase, what we're hoping is to get people from industry, get people from technology companies, get people from the regulatory agencies together and document use cases around the way that the data is being provided to regulatory agencies or the data is being used inside sponsor companies today, and document use cases where we can't maximize kind of the richness of our data because of either we're still stuck in kind of row and columns or because of the limitations of our data exchange and data transport formats. So what we're also going to do in that phase one is extend the bridge model for a targeted set of clinical domains to support those use cases. So to have a model where you can actually express some of the richness of the relationships between our different data points that we collect as part of a clinical trial. And then kind of the final piece of this initial phase is really to identify a technology set and create an executable model that supports the multidimensionality of clinical data, as well as some of the other use cases that are identified in the early stages of phase one. So the second phase of this project is really to prototype that model that we developed in the first phase by taking SDTM data that was created as part of the CDISC pilot or other publicly available SDTM data and putting it into the model. And then once we have it in the model, we want to test that model against some of the use cases. So an example might be, a use case might be, I can do a certain analysis if I had, the additional dimensions in the data. So we would test the model against those use cases. And then also as part of phase two, we'll define a set of quality metrics and then evaluate the performance of the new model against those metrics. So one metric might be that if I put data that I currently have in SDTM into that model, that I can extract the same data out of it. Again, that's just an example of a metric that we might create. So again, that's really what phase two of the project is about, is to test that prototype. So in terms of timelines and project needs, we intend to kick off this project in December 2015, or maybe very early in January 2016. So again, we'll be announcing the project in a more formal fashion, via PhUSE mail shot, via PhUSE social media. So if you have colleagues that are not on the teleconference that may be interested in this project, there's definitely the opportunity to either make them aware by sending them a recording of this webinar, or make them aware by different PhUSE communication channels. So again, the phase one of the project will occur from kickoff to the 2016 CSS. So even if you don't happen to be involved in the project in the initial phases, you can actually join at the 2016 CSS and kind of get engaged at that point. And then phase two, we're hoping to kind of kick off at the 2016 CSS and then carry that through until the end of 2016. So what we need to really move this project forward and come up with, a viable exploration of alternative transport formats, as well as a viable model that we can actually test against. We need an additional project co-lead. We have one co-lead that's been identified. However, as I mentioned when I was talking to the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards project, it would be useful to have a second co-lead on this project as well. We also need industry and regulatory agency participants to help develop use cases, so to identify where there are challenges with the transport format or the data structures as we have them today, and then to kind of document those so that we can test against them. We need additional bridge experts, so folks that can help us take the bridge model and extend it for a set of core domains. And then finally, we need participants that are willing to get us out, get us as an industry and us as a regulatory space out of 1985, and at least bring us up to the current state and possibly bring us into the future. So again, if you have questions on this project, please feel free to type them into the GoToWebinar functionality. If we don't have time to get to those today, we will get to those offline. And if you do have additional questions about the project after you kind of exit the webinar, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address will be at the end of the following presentation. So the third new project that we're here to talk to you about today is in the Semantic Technologies Working Group, and it's really around the use cases for linked data. So there's a little bit of overlap between the project that's evaluating alternative transport formats and this project around use cases for linked data, and we'll see that a little bit as we go along. So a little bit of background on this project is, so the Semantic Technology Working Group, its mission, I think, as Chris had mentioned in his introduction, it's really to investigate how semantic standards can be applied to the clinical trial lifecycle from protocol to submission. So we've been running a series of projects in that working group to kind of start at a higher level than protocol. We start at the clinical program design and look to represent that in RDF. And we looked at representing a protocol in RDF. We had the CDISC foundational standards represented in RDF and worked with CDISC to actually have those adopted as a CDISC standard. And there's another project that's looking at modeling, analysis, and results metadata, and they've made quite a bit of progress in that regard as well. And as Chris mentioned, at the 2016 CSS, a few folks are planning to run a session on semantic technology for pharma. So I guess the key question is, why do I care about all this stuff? So I'm going to give you two examples of why you should care about linked data and why you should care about semantic standards. So let's think about protocol objectives and protocol endpoints. So in the protocol, it's a human readable document, as we all know. So there's a series of endpoints or outcomes that are defined that support the objectives in a protocol. And on paper, those objectives and endpoints are disconnected. So it's humans that need to use their business knowledge to say, endpoint A supports objective 1, endpoint B supports objective 1, endpoint C supports objective 2. Well, anytime you throw humans into the mix, people may have a difference of opinion. So the second person may think that endpoint A supports objectives 1 and 2. So it just causes additional discussion and churn and thrash when you're actually doing protocol review, because you have to kind of resolve those differences of opinion and those different thought processes. So what would happen in a future state if we actually had linked data where we had the endpoints and objectives connected? So we take the humans out of the equation. So we have a relationship between the objectives or the endpoints and outcomes to say these endpoints and outcomes support the objectives. Or we have the opposite relationship that says these objectives have these endpoints. So in the Transcelerate Common Protocol template, they actually have these relationships defined. So that's an example of where there is a document that actually has the relationship explicitly defined in the document, so that if you are entering an objective, you can also at the same time enter the endpoints that support that objective. So then when it comes to protocol review, all people that are doing protocol review have at least the baseline understanding of which endpoints are supporting which objectives. So it will make the protocol review that much easier. So you can actually, you don't have to first connect the dots to identify which objectives or which endpoints are supporting which objectives, you know that up front, you can just confirm that those relationships are correct. Where again, in the current state, we first have to connect the dots. We have to have discussions around confirmation. We have people that may have difference of opinion, and it just creates some inefficiency. So again, if we had a future state where we have linked data, some of that efficiency would inefficiency, would be minimized. So let's look at a second example. So I think as most people hopefully are aware that typically the way that we collect adverse events and concomitant treatments that are given for adverse events are very disconnected. So what we need to do is we need to actually then reconcile to ensure that for adverse event headache, these are the concomitant treatments that are given for it. So the way that that's done today, we have two separate CRFs that are disconnected. We have a programmer in between that applies some fuzzy logic. And maybe on our CRF, maybe we do have a line number or something that may relate the adverse events and the concomitant treatments. But still that line number is entered by humans. It may or may not be correct. So regardless of how the data is collected, we have a programmer that's applying some fuzzy logic to join our adverse events and concomitant treatments. They create a report, and then that report typically will go to a data manager who will look at it from a business logic perspective and ensure that there's the relationships between the timing around the adverse event and the timing around the concomitant medication are the same, and just kind of examine it more from a logic perspective. And then we'll also send that report off to MDs or to the clinical group, and they'll actually examine it from a scientific perspective. Does it make sense that the person is taking Pepto-Bismol for a headache? Probably not. But I'm not an MD, so maybe that might make sense. But regardless, we have two people reviewing the same report from a different perspective. Because of the way the data is collected, that relationship just isn't there. So let's imagine a future state where the adverse events and the concomitant treatments that are taken for those adverse events are actually connected. So I know if I have a headache and I indicate that I'm taking something for that headache, I know exactly which medication that is being taken for that AE. So if I have that relationship explicitly defined, I probably don't need that programmer in the middle applying their fuzzy logic. I can just take that relationship, maximize its use, create my report, and then arguably, I don't need to send that report to data managers to review the business logic to say, well, does this set of overlapping dates, does the fuzzy logic that my programmer applied make sense? I can send it directly to my MD or my clinical person. They can do the scientific review to say, well, yes, it does make sense that for this headache that this person was taking Tylenol, for example. And then that can be your reconciliation. So you can see if we had a future state where we had linked data, we actually remove some of the inefficiencies, we've removed some of the fuzzy logic that's being applied today. We are actually able to execute our processes more efficiently in this future state. So I think for me, that's why I care, because I think we need to do things more efficiently than we've been doing it. And this is an example of how, if we had linked data, we could do things more efficiently. So with that background, the project itself, again, if we look at the current state, we have two-dimensional row and column data structures supporting multi-dimensional business processes. They're supporting multi-dimensional data, as I just explained with the adverse event concomitant treatment example. And today, it's human business knowledge that are filling those multi-dimensional voids. And again, when you have humans involved, there's differences of opinion, there's differences of interpretation. So if we had a future state where we had linked data solutions that supported the clinical trial lifecycle, some of those inefficiencies, would be minimized, and some of those might completely disappear. So the purpose of this project is not to come up with solutions about how we're going to implement linked data in the clinical trial lifecycle. It's really around documenting those use cases for the future state. So it's about saying, this is the way I do a task today. This is the way my business process executes today. If I had a linked data solution, and again, I'm not building a linked data solution, I'm assuming I had it, this is how my process, or this is how my task would be more efficient. So again, what we're looking to do with this project is really document those use cases and then summarize them in a white paper. So in terms of timelines and needs for this project, we're probably going to kick it off the week after the CSS interchange. So in November of 2015, we want to spend probably 2 months gathering use cases around how linked data could improve the way that we do business today, whether it's on the sponsor side, CRO side, the regulatory agency side, and then based on those use cases that we develop, come up with a white paper that we can present and summarize our findings. And we're hoping to have all of this wrapped up at the 2016 CSS. And again, given that people have day jobs, maybe the timelines might be more aggressive, so it may actually go past the 2016 meeting. So really, the needs for this project are really just industry and regulatory agency participants willing to develop use cases. And it's really not about, you don't need to have an intimate knowledge of linked data to participate in this project. It's really about being able to understand what your business processes are, whether you're a sponsor or whether you're on the regulatory side, and then being able to, envision a future state where if the relationships that are currently in your head with regard to that business processes were actually, available to a machine, how would that make your life easier? So again, anyone with business processes knowledge is really welcome and encouraged to join this project. And if you're interested in joining, please feel free to reach out to me. I am one of the co-leads for the project, and we will get you involved in that. And again, similarly with the evaluation of alternative transport formats, if you are interested in that project, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can get you connected there as well. So if there are any questions on either what Chris presented or these 3 new projects, we can address those now. And if not, I will just leave you with the important dates for the upcoming 2016 CSS. I'm not sure, Tora, have we received any questions or comments? So I will take Tora's silence as either we have not or we are having technical difficulties. So if you have submitted a question, I will pick those up offline and get those posted to the PhUSE website. Again, as a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be posted to the PhUSE website. So if you have colleagues that may be interested in the topics that were presented today, you can please forward that along. The recording is typically posted about a week after the webinar itself. And again, feel free to please follow PhUSE on LinkedIn and Twitter for all of the latest information with regards to new projects, new deliverables, as well as the 2016 CSS. So again, I want to thank you for your time today, and I hope that you found this informative. We'll be running another webinar in December, and look forward to seeing you on that as well. So I hope everyone has a good day, and again, thank you for your time.